So there's a popular pastor here in Atlanta who's getting dragged online because he's charging money for a podcast tour he's going to do with his fellow ministers. And they're going to charge tickets and VIP tickets. I've seen several Christian influencers and people who make Christian content go on these podcast tours where you just basically pay money to come see them live. And so he's getting some flack because of this, because it appears like he's selling the gospel. And so what I want to talk about is that where do we draw the lines between this is just a business venture versus now we're into territory where we're selling the gospel. First of all, let me say, if you're already a pastor of the gospel, you're going to experience this faster than somebody who's not a pastor. Because you're a pastor, people know you as a pastor, and anything you do outside of your pulpit or your ministry and you attach Christianity or Jesus to it, it's going to appear like you're selling the gospel. So if you have a calling to be a minister of the gospel, you have to be extremely careful about what you do outside of ministry to generate revenue. If you look at the Apostle Paul, he was called to be an apostle. His secondary occupation to generate revenue was being a tent maker. That is completely different from being an apostle. What I've noticed with ministers of the gospel and pastors, because we have the skill of preaching, we have the skill of counseling, a lot of times we try to create business ventures that capitalize on our skill set, like doing a conference, doing counseling, doing coaching. And we want to put a price tag on that because we see it as separate from our ministry. And although it may be separate, from a perception standpoint, it may still look like you're selling the gospel because your calling is that of a minister. What I like about the Apostle Paul is that his outside occupation was completely different from his calling. So it could even be construed in the same conversation that he was selling the gospel because it's completely different. So I'm looking at some things I was thinking about doing in the space of premarital counseling. And I too am struggling with this a little bit because I am a minister of the gospel. The people that would seek out my services are people that I'm actually ministering to. So if you guys notice, I've been slower to release that because I'm still seeking God. I'm still praying about it because it still feels like potentially I'm selling something that I should be doing for free because I'm a minister of the gospel. Now, this doesn't apply to people who are not called to ministry. So if you're called to just counseling, you're called to therapy, you're called to coaching, you can just put a price tag on it and it won't be construed because your primary calling is not of that of a minister. So if you're got a call to ministry, you got to be careful about these secondary occupations you step into. And even if you're not called to minister and you're a Christian and you're doing coaching, you're doing counseling, and you present your event or your counseling as if somebody's going to encounter God through what you're doing, now you too are crossing the line into selling the gospel. And so if you're a Christian artist who's a musician and you want to create a night of worship where we're going to bring the presence of God and we're going to worship God from the stage, the moment you put a price tag on that, it looks like you're selling the gospel because the language you're using is that of faith, that of church. You're saying we're going to enter in. We're saying we're going to worship God, and then you're going to put a price tag on it. That's not how God does things. The way you would reframe that is you'll simply say, hey, I am putting on the show. If you want to come hear me sing some of my best material, come hear me sing. You're paying to hear the person sing. We're not going to create a night of worship around that. Because the moment we're doing that, now we're kind of in that church territory. So me as Amos Johnson, when people invite me to speak at their events, my first question is this a paid event or not? Because if it's a paid event, I got to scrutinize what the event is about. And I want to make sure that people are not paying to come hear me preach the gospel. Because me preaching the gospel is free. I don't charge money for preaching the gospel. And I don't want to do other events that's charging money to preach the gospel. And so these are things that we all as Christians have to wrestle with, and especially those who are called to ministry have to wrestle with this. If you have a call to ministry, that's going to eliminate some of the things you can do just because of the perceived perception of you selling the gospel. So in this video, I don't have a clear-cut rule for you, but I'm going to just give you some thoughts to think through, especially if you're a minister of the gospel. Anything you do that's similar to what you're called to do as a minister of the gospel is going to be perceived as you selling the gospel. That's why I really like what Paul did. He's selling tents. He's not putting on workshops about how to hear the voice of God. Because if so, that's kind of like what he should be doing part of his calling. And even as Christians, you got to be really careful to make sure you don't promote your event as bringing in the presence of God, or let's get into the scriptures. Don't get people saved. But if these people got to pay a ticket price to get into the gospel, to get saved, now we're moving away from how Jesus presented the gospel in scripture. Jesus did everything for free. He healed for free. He fed for free. He preached for free. He cast out demons for free. The gospel is free. The gospel should be experienced freely. Worship is free. Worship should be experienced freely. And if you want to put on an event, believe God for sponsors and donors who can actually cover the costs for those events. Now, after the event is over, if you want to take an offering, that's fine. But it shouldn't be a gate to get into an event that's going to preach the gospel, bring in the presence of God, because now we're crossing the line into selling the gospel.